Hello guys, welcome back to Tabletop Republic's YouTube channel. My name is Seb K, and this is Assisted Fire. Welcome back guys. I know it's been a while. It's been about a month since I did my last video. The reason for that is that I've been working on getting myself set up as a streamer. I do a lot of miniature painting and both commission work and non-commission work. And I thought it would be cool to set up a channel and just let people come in and chat about games and we talk about everything, not just Infinity. Most of the time we're talking just about hobby and techniques and things like that. So that's been a lot of fun to start doing. I've done 7 streams so far and it's going really, really well. So if you guys want to jump on, there's a link on the screen right now that you can go check out. There's also links in the description. This coming Wednesday, I'm going to be painting bronze. I started painting that today and we're going to be working on painting the rest of it on Wednesday, whilst talking a lot about Infinity in general and O-12. So if you guys want to jump on and join me in a conversation about that, that would be great. What are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about Starmarda today. This has been one of those things that's taken me a long time to get round to, mostly because I've been busy, but also because this is a tough faction to break down. I think a lot of people, since they came out, have been trying to build lists for this faction and really hitting a wall sometimes. If you're one of those players that likes to have a lot of options and include a lot of things in your list, you're going to struggle to do that. With Starmada, everything's very expensive. Everything's, got a very specific role and isn't necessarily the best that O-12 could have had in this faction. If we'd included some of the other units like Gangbusters and Team Sirius and things like that, we would have been able to do a lot more. But what I've done is I've broken the faction down to start with into what I think are pros and cons for this faction and the problems you might run into. That is not to say that this is a bad faction. As we go through the pros and cons, it might seem like I'm harping on a bit about deficiencies here and there, but that doesn't mean that they're not effective. It just means that they have some issues, which I think is good in terms of game design anyway. Not every faction needs to have absolutely everything available to them. And sectorials tend to lead into a certain playstyle. I know that a lot of people like to pick a sectorial and want to be able to do everything, and I don't think that's the way that they're designed. I think that if you want to be able to do everything, you've got access to a vanilla faction there. If you want to be able to do lots of different things, and if you want to be able to really leverage one particular playstyle and push things in one direction, you pick a sectorial. That's the way I think the way the game is designed at the moment. You can agree whether that's or disagree whether that's how you would like factions to be designed, but we don't make the game, and most of the time the factions are put together fairly well. So let's go on and talk about what I think of the pros of this faction. I think pro-wise, definitely the fact that there's smoke. Smoke can be a great deciding factor for a lot of people. Smoke is such a useful tool and such a versatile tool. And this faction also has access to a plethora of MSV units that can take advantage of that, especially with the new rules that allow MSV1 troopers to shoot through smoke as well. And where it's not as effective, it may not be, but it still works and has become an interesting, change to the game. I think one of the biggest ones. In terms of individual units that can leverage this, we've only got the Epsilon unit, unfortunately, which can really take advantage of a smoke combo and shoot through it. And it is not linkable. There are lots of factions that get this unit linkable. Interestingly, White Banner has recently received the linkable MSV2 troop with smoke, which is a little bit nasty. But we don't get that, but we do have units that can leverage the beauty or there is smoke in this game. So that is a good thing. Great characters. This faction has incredible characters. They're definitely, it's very character heavy. It pretty much lives and dies by the characters. Kind of similar to Forco in that sense, Steel Phalanx, that sort of thing, where you're going to be taking a lot of characters. And I think that if you're not taking a lot of characters, you may not want to be looking at this faction overall, because I think that's where they get the most, the best units and things like that. Definitely come from the great characters and wild cards that they have available. This faction hits incredibly hard, has really, really good heavy infantry units, really, really good. It's not that it hits hard specifically with big guns, but it hits hard in the sense that its units are reliable, they're durable. Um, a lot of they have unique guns available to them, i.e., talking about Hector and the plasma rifle. Um, some of the other heavy infantry, like the beta troopers, are good, reliable guns. They might not be the most hard hitting guns, but they are good, reliable guns that will do a lot of damage. And they, with the variety of heavy infantry they have available, they can do a lot of damage when the time comes. They have really good hackers. It's not that they have the best hackers in the game, but they have a hell of a lot of options for that. So that is something that you're not necessarily going to be lacking. As we'll talk about in cons, not necessarily going to be using it super offensively in terms of hacking, but there's still a lot of options there, and they're very, very good. And they're all linkable, and it's good. It's definitely decent. Parvati, the fact that Parvati is available at all, and the fact that she's linkable. As far as I know, she's not linkable in any other faction. I haven't gone through OSS for Aleph. I haven't checked to see if they added a linkable version of Parvati there, but I don't think they have, which means that this is the only faction that can take Parvati. And when we get to Parvati in terms of this faction, we'll be talking about why that's such a big deal, because she really is something special. In terms of cons, you're going to have a lot of trouble utilizing all of your SWC in this faction. There are, a couple of ways to build this faction, but if you build this faction as like very character heavy, you're not going to be spending your SWC. Now, that isn't necessarily a terrible thing. It really comes down to playstyle, but you will find that you'll write a list and you've spent like 3 SWC or something, and you're trying to find other ways to get decent guns in there. After you've taken all the things that you want, it just so happens in this faction that not all the things that you'd want actually cost SWC. So it is a little bit strange, and if you might find yourself lacking in those traditionally big guns, if you build this faction around the characters, like I think you probably should. So that is a bit of a weird thing, and something to keep in mind. There's no go-to rock solid ARO piece. Now, this kind of thing is very player specific, and isn't necessarily something that you should do all the time. And most players are shying away from the big, heavy ARO piece that you just shove on a building somewhere and is a roadblock and is difficult to get through. But this faction really doesn't have an option to do that. Nothing that really does that in a spectacular way. The bronze can sort of do it, but all of the other guns that you're going to find, your missile launchers, your snipers, your things like that, they're all going to be on the lighter troops or troops that aren't linkable. So you're not going to get access to that really solid big ARO piece, with the exception of the tag, obviously. But that's not necessarily what you want to be doing with your tag. So yeah, if you do like playing that style, and that style can be useful against certain factions, this faction doesn't really do it very well. There is no hidden deployment in this faction whatsoever, and I think that is a huge problem in the way that I play the game, but also against countering things that your opponent might try to do to you. Having hidden deployed troops is not only good for completing objectives in a sneaky and efficient way, but it's also good for counteracting your opponent's surprises. Because if you have a surprise that they weren't ready for, when they try to pull that drop troop up on you, or their war bands are making advance or things like that, for you to be able to spring a hidden deployed trooper that can shoot well, or even passably well, that will really, blunt the advance, and really take them out of their stride when they're trying to sneak up on you. And it covers your back. And I tend to now lean towards factions that have decent hidden deployed defensive troops and infiltrating troops, more so than factions that don't. And I think that you're missing out on a big defensive part of your play if you can't take one. So I do think it is a bit of a detriment that this faction doesn't have one. They're not super flexible. If you're running, in terms of building lists, it can be difficult to write a list that does more than a couple of things very well. I think that this faction is going to have trouble completing missions very effectively, even though they have really, really good, tough forward deploying troops. And they do have one infiltrator in the form of Andromeda, who we've talked about in previous videos. She comes with her own baggage, literally, her own problems. So she's not necessarily the go-to. And when you fall back on the other forward deploying stuff, it's all very expensive. And just because it's a little bit tougher doesn't mean it isn't going to go down just as easily, to other infiltrated specialist troops and or non-specialist troops. And because none of it's hidden deployed, because none of it's in camo state, your opponent doesn't have to really think that hard to work around these things. And they're going to know where all of your stuff is. And it's going to be quite a tempting target if they brought the right stuff. And in terms of mission completion, that can make things very difficult for you. It makes it easier for your opponent to hamstrung your advance and to tie up your midfield. And that's not great when you need to push those buttons. And they can be very difficult to use as a result of their heavy reliance on fire teams. If you are an inexperienced player, you're going to struggle to, manage these fire teams, to make sure all your facings are correct, to remember all the things that these guys have got, to really get the most out of them, because there's a lot of skills packed into a very few amount of profiles here. You're going to find your link team as end games where you've forgotten half the stuff that your link team does. You really need to keep track of that, and that can make them very difficult to use for an inexperienced player. And there's no, as I said, there's no go-to guy who can solve a lot of problems for you. You're going to have to leverage the abilities of multiple different units in order to be that effective with it with Starmada. So you've got to keep that in mind. And they are short on tricks. As I said, there's not a lot of camo, there's not a lot of hidden deployment, infiltrators, that sort of thing. But there's also not a lot of mines. There's not a lot of, decent sensor options outside the standard sensor bot. There's not a lot of repeaters. So even though you have a lot of really, good hacking options, you don't have a lot of offensive hacking options. You've only got the pitcher on the Cyber Ghost, and he's not amazingly good at doing, using the pitches. You know what I mean? He's only BS11. So it's not super effective if you're planning on using your hacking offensively. When you get your fire teams in the right place, or you get your units in the right place, you can definitely do the hacking. But without repeaters, you're gonna struggle to get multiple hackers in on the game at the same time. And yeah, it's a bit of a shortcoming. No tricks. Very straightforward faction. But that isn't to say that these guys aren't fun and they're not effective. And it just means that you're going to have to very carefully think about what guns am I taking? What are they on? How I'm going to position them to get the most out of them. And that's exactly the same with hacking, positioning and how you're going to get the most out of your guys if you plan on doing that. And it can be difficult. So there we go. So as I said, it's not that this faction is bad. It's just that in the context of the game, there are other factions that do have more options. But that isn't to say that these guys can't be effective in the right situation. Okay, well, with all that being said, let's start with the cappers, shall we? So I'm not going to go into super detail into the stat lines, because we've done that in the previous videos and we've pretty much talked about all of these units from a granular perspective. I'm only going to talk about them in the context of the faction as a whole and what you're going to be looking to build around. So looking at Kappa units, they are a phenomenal unit in terms of just a basic line troop. They're a really good, efficient line troop that has a great skill in this immunity shock. Just makes them a little bit more durable, means they're not likely to go down or get completely removed from the table in one hit. If you take more than one wound, of course they're going to go down, and if they get hit by a big gun, they will. But the fact that they do have shock immunity just gives you the ability to maybe bring them back up, so that is definitely a plus. There are pretty much two ways to build this faction. Okay, so you're gonna be looking at either packing your link teams out with the heaviest guys, and unfortunately, some of the characters that you do have access to do require you take a base of some of the heavier, more expensive units than the cappers. The other way to build your list is to start with the cappers, fill out your order pool with some of these cheaper guys, throw in a couple of wild cards that can go in there, like the Psychops, etc. And just do things that way, right? And then that gives you a little bit more points to play with later on down the line. And this is also one of your easiest ways to spend SWC. It may not be the best way, but a ballistic skill troop, line troop, is still very, very good. You speak to any Pano player and they'll tell you just how many games they've won as a result of their line troops being just so much better at shooting than most people's. So that ballistic skill 12 is a damn good place to start. And also being able to take some of these heavier guns on a troop that is decent in a 5-man core with a +3 ballistic skill and the +1 burst suddenly makes these line troops quite a bit scarier than you'd normally find. Taking the HMG, though, I would feel that was a little bit going over the top if you're planning on making this guy a main shooter, but it is only one SWC, and that isn't a bad thing. If you've got the points left and you've got the SWC, you could throw an extra HMG in there. He might end up being a decent backup shooter for you, because at the end of the day, 5 dice with +3 ballistic skill is going to be just as good on a Kappa as it is on any other unit. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. The sniper and the missile launcher are your go-to ARO pieces. The missile launcher is still very, very good at 17 points, and in a faction where you're not spending a lot of SWC, you may as well throw one of those in. They are just as terrifying on the line troop as they are on any other troop, because at the end of the day, it's about winning dice rolls, and 2 dice coming at you with the potential of explosive is always horrific for your opponent, regardless of who's carrying the gun. I almost wish that they'd included the missile launcher in the new pack for Starmarda, but they included the sniper, which does a similar job. It just happens to be a little bit more expensive, and I think a lot of people will probably just pick the missile launcher, so it is a bit odd that they chose to go with putting the sniper in the box instead of the missile launcher. And annoyingly, there isn't a model you can use currently in the O-12 lineup that really represents the missile launcher. I don't think we've actually seen an O-12 missile launcher. It'll look very similar to others, but I'm just saying in terms of models, there isn't really one out there that you can use to proxy this, which is kind of annoying. But my recommendation would be to, if you're going to start, build out a core of these guys with a couple thrown in. They can, as far as I know, they can go with the blue coats. Let's find blue coats, so directly underneath. Fire team Corin Harris, yes, can be part of a fire team of Kappas. So you can actually throw a couple of blue coats in there. They don't come with anything particularly different, but we'll talk about those in a minute. And also this hacker profile, this is just an exceptionally good hacker profile because the whip is decent. It costs literally no points, and in terms of hacking coverage, it can be a liability, but it can also be a good defensive tool if you're covering, something else in the thing. If you decide to take a Kappa lieutenant, I wouldn't ever do that because it's one SWC, but there might be a blue coat lieutenant thrown in there somewhere if you couldn't find a good place for a lieutenant profile. Although with Hector available, which we'll talk about in a minute, I'm not sure you're going to be putting your lieutenant on a line troop. But if you were, and even if you're not, having an extra hacker in that group might be really useful. Now, this is one of the only places where you can get a deployable repeater, but again, it's a bit of an odd place to have one. It's not going to be easy to leverage offensively, and even defensively, you may not want to spend orders putting down a deployable repeater, but it is something that you do have available here. But all in all, it wouldn't be a bad thing to just throw a few of these in, throw one of the, decently biggish guns in there. Maybe use one as a cheap throwaway ARO piece, at least you've got that. And as I said, you're not spending your SWC elsewhere most of the time. So you could throw in the missile launcher and be happy in the sense that you've got that. And as a shooter, as I said, it's not bad offensively either. Missile launchers aren't as good, obviously, as sniper rifles and HMGs offensively, but still, it's a hard-hitting gun that you might need to use in the pinch. Obviously, you've just got your regular assortment of stuff. Paramedics are still much better than they used to be, so it is something that you might want to consider, even if you do have Parvati running around with Yudbots or something, or if she's linked, you might want to have another doctor-ish backup. You do have access to the Lambda as well for a similar points cost, so it depends on how you're planning on building out. Paramedics really are can be quite a bit of a liability still, just because they're going on the target's physique. But I have thrown one in occasionally as a cheap specialist, so you can definitely consider that. But overall, Kappas are good, and now that you can actually build a core of them, you can really leverage their abilities. And with decent wildcards to throw in, they are pretty good as well. So if you're going for maybe a non-limited insertion list, or you've got designs on putting the more expensive troops into a Harry's, which you definitely should do in some cases in this faction, having these guys, giving you orders and not taking up a lot of points is awesome. So blue coats, you have to kind of talk about in the same breath, because what they do is they just make, for me, they add some defensive options to your core. They make them harder to approach. Adhesive launcher, right stoppers, that sort of thing is really, really good for stopping impersonation troops or limiting the damage that they can do quite substantially. Anyone who wants to try and sneak up on you is going to have to deal with the right stopper potential, which is always absolutely horrible. You also have a 0 SWC lieutenant. Now, this faction doesn't really struggle for lieutenants. They've got good lieutenants, and some of them have some, crazy buffs, like Hector, for example. So if you're taking one of these, this might just be that you're not taking Hector in your list. And I'm not saying that you should take him all the time. You might come up with a mission where you just need more space to put in more specialists in terms of points, where you might have a different lieutenant. And having this lieutenant, he's not an easy one to approach. With the heavy right stopper, SMGs can provide a nasty bite, and if he's getting buffed by the link team, he can be a bit of a problem to take down. And also, if you've got more than one in your link team, it can be difficult for them to guess which one is in fact your lieutenant if they suspect that you're doing a blue coat lieutenant. But these profiles are absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking this Red Fury option over the HMG option. HMGs hit harder, they're cheaper in terms of the Kappa HMG. Quite a bit cheaper, actually. They're about 5 points cheaper at the same SWC cost. So I'm Red Furies are great because they have shock, but I'm still leaning more towards having the HMG for the longer range. And leveraging range bands is definitely useful when you're firing with a line troop that can go down quite easily. You need to put things in your favor as much as possible, and I would prefer the HMG for that. But overall, we know that blue coats are a very, very good unit. They have a lot of great abilities, really, really good skills across the board. And the not natural born warrior, the Discover +3 really helps you to deal with, sneaky troops and things, and the biometric visor. It just adds that extra bit of defense to your core. If you're going to throw some in, I wouldn't mind, just throwing in like an adhesive launcher guy, because he's only one more point than a Kappa. It's just gives you a couple of different options, and leveraging the adhesive launcher offensively in the link team bonus plus the 1+1 burst there is a burst 3 adhesive launcher with a decent ballistic skill if it's fully linked when you do it. So again, really cool. Blue coats are awesome. Take them if you can. And it fits with what you're doing with your list. You will find that if you're building a list around limited insertion, you're probably not, but you might still have room for a blue coat, and if you do, then you should take one. Okay, so lore keepers. So we talked about lore keepers in terms of the other faction of O-12, vanilla O-12, as a whole, and whether they really needed one. Adding a fast specialist onto their already very efficient specialists and cheap specialists wasn't necessarily something you needed to do, but something that you could still do in regular O-12. But in Starmada, I think you absolutely do need to consider this unit, because you don't have a lot of very fast, efficient specialists and fast attacking options. There's a lot of 6-2 move in this faction, which is really, really good. But units that can reposition very, very quickly, this is a good one. He's not super expensive, he's also not super cheap, and he is quite squishy, so it's a bit of a finesse unit, but I think it adds an extra specialist options, a couple of extra attacking options. The sidebot is horrible. Anyone who's come up against a unit like this that's, got a synchronized peripheral that has any kind of template weapon, it really opens up a bunch of horrible choices for your opponent to have to make when defending, and it can be really nasty. So I really, really like the specialist operative, these two, because you're going to be short on specialists. Putting a good gun on this guy, you've got other places to spend these points and to get good guns, if I'm being honest. At ballistic skill 12, you can definitely do better than that in this faction for a similar points range. And I think 1.5 SWC is a bit strange on the sidebot Red Fury combo, mostly because the sidebot's template is only a 10-inch template, so the ability to get a Red Fury and the template leveraged with positioning, You can still get them both in a good range, but it's a little trickier. So I'm not a huge fan of that. Whereas, without spending any SWC, don't forget this guy gets +1 damage. So the combi rifle's damage 14. So that's pretty cool. And as a specialist, obviously, you're going to need those. And unlike Andromeda, he has the ability to get off the bike and use a smaller silhouette value, which is definitely useful. You're going to need some efficiency as well in this faction, so Impetuous on this unit is definitely useful too. Nyokas. So let's talk about the first unit that I think was designed from the ground up to be used in this faction, and it's pretty much the core of this faction. Yes, you have Kappas as a core, but if you're building out some cores that take advantage of some of the heavier units and the cooler characters, I think Nyokas is where you should start. So let's look at some of the key stats here that make these guys a decent core. The first thing is that they all come with immunity shock, which is kind of a mainstay of the base units in this faction, which is really, really cool. As I've said, that makes them durable. +1 damage on all the attacks. That's kind of okay. It's cool to have it, definitely. And the problem is that it's a bit of a weird one. I'm trying to work out how many points that's added, because as an ability for a core troop to have that extra damage, coming from playing Druze, I do really enjoy having it, but it really is only a 5% swing. So when you're actually playing, it feels like a lot more than it actually is on paper. But I don't see that you're paying a lot of extra points for that across the board. Same with Climbing Plus. This is a very, very useful skill to have on your core troops, because it means that your core fire team is going to be a lot more maneuverable and flexible, which is definitely what you want when you're pumping quite a few points into your fire teams. But the problem is that when you start plugging in wildcard troopers that can't use Climbing Plus, it basically hampers the mobility of the entire core, because you've got to think, well, these guys can use it, but these guys can't. So you end up with this sort of weird imbalance of what's going on in your unit. So if you're just taking these guys, yeah, it's awesome that they all have Climbing Plus, but doing what you should do, which is plug in a couple of wildcards probably, or what you want to be doing, which is why you're taking these guys, then yeah, you might struggle a little bit with that. But it is still an amazing thing to have. And when we talk about the parachuters version, that actually is cool that it carries over to him as well. So that's really awesome. Nick and Harry's, which is where you're going to be building some of your cheaper, if you want to build a nice attacking Harry's that has one of the major characters or two of the major characters in it, this is where you're going to be doing it. Be careful though, you may need to, and these guys aren't super cheap, you may need to take more than one of these guys. Otherwise your core fire team, if it's built around one dude and a bunch of characters, is going to fall apart the moment that one of these Nyokas dies. So you're kind of hamstrung by then having to take one of these profiles, and it's going to cost 40 to 50 points depending on what you've taken, just to have that redundancy there. So you've got to, these guys aren't super expensive, but they're not super cheap. So you've got to bear that in mind. The profiles that really stand out here, obviously the Forward Observer is cool because you may need to throw an extra specialist in there. But there's also other places to get specialists, but it is good that they have it. The heavy rocket launcher really stands out, and I think that's the one that you're going to see the most because it's super cheap. Heavy rocket launchers have a much more manageable range band than missile launchers do. Obviously, they don't hit as hard, but being able to have the +1 damage on that one still makes it hit quite hard. And it's definitely one of those places where you're going to be looking to spend your SWC on, because it's the cheapest profile, and you should probably definitely start with that. The HMG, I think it's a little bit expensive for a 1 wound model. You got to remember this is a 1 wound armor 1 model. And looking at them now that we've seen the model, I was expecting them to be at least armor 2 now that you see the way it looks, but unfortunately they're still armor 1. So this is quite a flimsy and very expensive HMG at 28 points, and I think that there are probably more durable platforms, at least a couple more durable platforms for you to have your gun on, or if you don't want a durable platform, Kappas are there. And an Epsilon HMG might, for a similar points cost, be on his own, but might be a more flexible and decent shooter than this guy. Don't forget, these guys don't have any negative mods going at your opponent at all. They're just a standard guy that tends to be a bit more expensive, but with 1 wound armor 1. So you have to be careful about where you spend your points. Same with these other profiles at multi-rifles. You've got Cyclops, and Cyclops can be thrown in there to do the specialist role. They're all specialist operatives, right from the get-go. And they're all around a similar points cost, and they come with a plethora of other really, really cool abilities and equipment as well. So just having these straight up multi-rifle profiles is not great on the Nyokas. And I have to admit, I wish there was a couple more profiles thrown in here that just had a little bit more variation. Maybe drop the multi-rifle on a couple of them, get something around this 19 points cost, just to help you build out a core that isn't necessarily cappers. But this is what we've got, and with what you've got here, I would recommend taking a couple of them if you're building a 5-man core, and you might just be stuck with having one of them if you're building a Harry's team. But heavy rocket launcher, you could definitely have 2 of those. You're not going to be spending your SWC in many places, so you could just have a couple of heavy rocket launchers. I have to mention range band management as well is a bit of a problem. If you're building a core team or a Harry's team and you expect it to move up the table, throwing a lot of long-range guns in here that are only good at a longer range can mean that your other troops, you're fighting with range bands a lot, and you can cover the shorter range bands with other troops and different guns. But, you might find that you're struggling to leverage everything in your core team at the same time, or the ability to leverage them all at the same time. Now, I know you can't fire them all at once, but it would be nice if half of your team wasn't out of range all the time. You know what I mean? So often when I'm building a Harry's team that I know is going to go up the table, I try to shorten their range band a bit, so that they're able to engage in the midfield. And because they're going to be operating in that midfield, you want them to be in plus range all the time. And you don't want your missile launcher or rocket launcher to be, in its useless range the moment you go into position, with your other guys. So yeah, just keep that in mind, a bit of range band management. Looking at these 2 bottom profiles, though, these are really interesting to have a parachutist, basically a drop troop thrown in with your core troops. Now, this bunch of abilities they've got here does make these a little bit more expensive than you'd expect from a straight parachutist that hasn't got the drop troop skill. But then, having said that, they're physique 11 anyway, so you wouldn't necessarily want to be dropping these guys in if you could avoid it. Out of the 2, though, I mean, obviously, if you wanted to drop in specialist, you've got this, but you've got other options. Well, not necessarily great options, but you do have the Crusher, which is only a little bit more expensive than this guy, but it might be about 10 more points, so that is quite a bit more. But I think I'd be leaning more on that because it is a bit more durable than these guys. If I were to take a specialist drop troop, and you've got to remember, coming on the side of the table might still put you quite far away from objectives if that's what you're planning on doing with them. But this gun isn't bad. A Red Fury that can come on the side of the table, it's got +1 damage, so it's basically a Spitfire with shock. So that's pretty cool. They're okay shooters. They're not amazing. And don't forget that Crushers do have negative mods. They're Mimtim -3. So they're putting negative mods on your opponent, and this unit is not. So it's a pretty bare bones, parachutist gun. I don't hate it, but I don't super love it. And if you have the points, I would rather take the Crusher probably over this guy. But it's still cool that this option exists, and I wouldn't think badly of you if you took him. So that's Nyokas. The Chang'u, or the Chang'ao, however you want to pronounce it, has a couple of interesting synergies in this faction. It's a bit of a weird one to randomly pop up, but they are operating in space, and the Chang'ao are the space Yujing space operatives as well. So it does make sense that they're kind of thrown in. These first 3, now we can talk briefly about how jammers aren't quite as good as they used to be. They're disposable and they don't get fire team bonuses. But they're still quite cool to have, but they're not the be-all and end-all they used to be now. So what I'm looking at here mostly is the hacker option is pretty good at WIP 14. Very good killer hacking device, and it's something that's good to cover your Harry's teams. I wouldn't necessarily put it in a core unless you were using one of the jammer profiles, but even then, still they're quite expensive, and you do have access to Cyclops, as I mentioned, who are a similar points cost and do a bunch of other stuff. Having one of these, having a jammer Holomast in a link team isn't as powerful as it used to be. So I'm not sure that that's gonna sell this unit anymore the way it used to. It used to be just like, oh my god, you want to put one of these in every core team, every Harry's if you can manage it. But I don't, and they're AVA1 as well, so you've really got to think about where you're putting it and where to put it. I actually really like the combination of this hacking device with the Beta Troopers. If you're putting the Beta Troopers in a core or a Harry's, they do have a Timbot. So you're putting negative mods on, and then you combine that with a decent WIP 14 hacker, killer hacking device, so you can do some offensive and decent defensive hacking there. At least you've got something to counter them or make them think twice about how they approach your Beta Troopers if they want to hack them. So I think that's pretty cool. The two down the bottom, this is one where you've actually got mad traps, and this is the thing, you don't get access to a lot of mines in this faction defensively, so it's cool that you get options to, you get the ability to take mad traps here, and that fits quite well with O-12's sort of theme of gluing people down and doing annoying things in the midfield. So even though this isn't a forward deploying unit, it can be a decent backline defender. With the Red Fury as well, it's a fairly decent backup gun. I mean, it's 12 points, but it does give access to that. And the fact that it's holo projected means that you could be holo projected as something completely innocuous. You might have enough, feel that you've got enough doctors and stuff, and you just put him as a doctor or a blue coat or something like that. But then the mad trap kind of gives you away, because if they know O-12 or Starmada at all, they'll know that there aren't going to be mad traps coming up anywhere else. So yeah, that might be a bit of a giveaway as to the fact that one of your guys is a Chang'e, but at least you have it. It is a thing you can do, and I'm sure you guys, if you had more time to think about it, you can probably come up with a decent use for that holo projector as well. And I'm not sure you would want to take this one down the bottom, even though it's a really decent hacker. I think it's extremely expensive, and I think if he's just starting your deployment zone, I think you should probably better off taking the Cyber Ghost, because it's got more versatility as a hacker, although this guy does come with mad traps. So really it's just a toss-up, and it depends on what you would like to have in your backline for defense. But even though, overall the Chang'e is an interesting addition to this faction, and does provide a couple of things that you don't get elsewhere. And to come back to the jammers a little bit, if you do have a jammer in your attacking Harry's team, that can be very, very good for closing off a section of the board and just making them think twice about coming at you, especially seeing as, or if you're holo projecting, they don't know what it is, you can be a nasty trap to spring on them, but it's just not a very reliable one. It's not the reliable trap it used to be. So you do need to keep that in mind, guys. I mean, it's a face-to-face role, and things don't always go the way you planned. Cyclops. So the Cyclops next to the Nyokas for me are what really sets this faction apart, because this is one hell of a unit. This is definitely one of the most versatile, just all-round incredible units I've seen in Infinity the game in general. I think this is a really fantastic unit. It brings everything that I like about a unit, the shock immunity, and a cheap unit as well. The shock immunity, for the durability. They're all specialist operatives, so you're immediately adding that to your faction. And as I said, there aren't a lot of efficient specialists here, but having a ton of specialists everywhere keeps you in the game. Means that late game, once some of your bigger pieces are taken down, or and you really need to get those buttons pushed, you've always got options. If you've included a couple of Cyclops here and there, you may just need them to go up. I mean, their whip isn't phenomenal, but it's not terrible. But more importantly, their ballistic skill is very, very good. Ballistic skill 13, especially on a mimetism -3 model across the board, all of them are. Yeah, that's really, really, really good. Like, really good, guys. I mean, plugging these in with link bonuses and so on can produce like a really, really good gunfighter. And they've all got the options that you need. Like just everything here is great. So you've got your MSV1 with a multi-marksman rifle. So this is a basically, range band wise, we're talking Spitfire range here. Just good out to most of the table. With MSV1, obviously you need that. You've got access to smoke if you want to do that, and it's a good deterrent sometimes. Especially with link bonuses, a burst 2 with a multi. Yeah, making 2 saves is not cool. And the fact that smoke doesn't keep people completely safe from these guys makes them amazing. Incidentally, you've also got a similar version of this profile, but with it swapped with biometric visor, discover level 3. I would rather have this ability set on the blue coat. So if you're plugging in doing a core of Kappas or and that's what you're building around, throwing one of these guys in might be a bit redundant if you also have blue coats in there. But taking the MSV1, definitely a good idea. Same with the hackers. The hackers are all right, the hacking device here. You could take the cheap one on the Kappa, but the killer hacking device is decent. It's cheap enough. And these guys are just all-round good shooters anyway, even when you just give them combi rifles. Ballistic skill 13. Combi rifles kill things, and having a decent shooter with a combi rifle with a burst bonus can be just as good as some other guns in the game, So definitely don't overlook these guys. And in the link team, that +1 burst on the nanopulsar becomes a +3, a burst 3 nanopulsar is another amazing thing to have plugged into your link team. If you can throw one of these in a Harry's team, you're really going to get the most out of it, especially if it's moving up the table, getting into the good range bands, and up close can potentially leverage that. I think it's just brilliant. So yes, Cyclops, take these and profit, basically. Just a great unit all round. Crushers. So this is another thing that they've made, kind of build the faction around. This is your go-to button pusher most of the time. It's going to be your go-to midfield fighter. He's very durable. Both the shock immunity and no wound incapacitation. It's a 2-wound model with armor 2. Having one of those up in the midfield, when you factor the fact in that he's basically a 2-wound model, and the fact that it's no wound incap, I mean, he's operating so far up the field that you probably wouldn't be doctoring this guy. So it's effectively a 2-wound model. And where he's going to be operating, he's got all the toys to do everything he needs to do. The multi-rifles, on the first profile, the nanopulsar decharges, again, really good profile, if a little bit expensive, especially when you're looking at this profile here, which is the one that I think a lot of people are going to be taking. I'm a little bit not impressed with the submachine gun. I think that if you're going to spend this many points on a unit, you want him to be able to take on some of the bigger targets in the game. And the SMG, whilst good, may not have the ranges to be useful, to engage things that you need to engage. And I think that if you're planning on doing a lot of shooting with this guy, I think the multi-rifle is probably the better out of the two, if we're just looking at these two. The fact they all have decharges at CC17 is definitely good as well. And a lot of people will say, 17 is not very good. But no, it's amazing. It's 85% chance to hit, Yes, it's a face-to-face roll, but sometimes it might not be, right? If you need to do things to do with objectives and things, like, you're going to be glad that this guy has a decent CC skill and the decharges. So it's pretty good. And if you manage to glue something down with your blue coat or something, a tag or whatever, which might happen, with a burst 3 adhesive launcher from a blue coat, you can definitely put some stuff down. And having one of these guys to whip round, because he's already in the midfield, and plant decharges on something could be really handy. Any target, it doesn't have to be a tag. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. But this profile here, the 35.1 with the light rocket launcher, that gives you a backup ARO piece, definitely. I wouldn't, rely on this guy to do a lot of damage in ARO, but he's still going to be good at it. I mean, his mimetism -3 means that he's difficult to hit. So he's going to be ballistic skill 13 for the shots back. Light rocket launchers are horrible. No matter how heavy they are, people can fail armor saves, and they can fail multiple armor saves. So continuous damage is always awesome. Templates, of course, as well. Really, really good. The SMG gives him the ability to go into suppressive fire, which is not something that I talk about enough. I should mention how amazing suppressive fire is now, especially considering that you can do it from the start of the game, which is a way of keeping this guy safe. And because of the combination of these two, like the first profile, he's good at a lot of ranges, and he's actually better at longer ranges, of course, than the multi-rifle. So definitely one to keep in mind. There is a gap there, of course, between 0 to 16, but you can work your way around that. This guy is incredibly versatile. 1 SWC, really, really good. 2 wounds, 35 points. Wouldn't be surprised if you ended up taking more than one of these guys, just because they're so versatile. The only thing that lets them down a little bit is I kind of wanted them to have a faster move, because again, this faction needs some efficient specialists. So a 6-2 move would be cool, but I think that'd be asking a bit much. But yeah, fantastic all round. The bottom profile is kind of like a different unit, so we'll talk about that separately now. So it's combat jump parachuters. It's Phys 12 standard drop troop fare. You can buff it, of course. This faction, like all of them, has access to an Evo bot, so that's cool. Although just taking an Evo bot to buff this guy up to Phys 15 for the drop, especially with things they can counter hack you and put him back down to a 12. Not entirely sure. I'm going to be dropping him in a lot. He's a bit of a weird one. So he's a lot like the Delta, but he does have the mimetism. The reason why I say that is because it's a Delta profile with a boarding shotgun Panzerfaust. So everything I said about that unit applies here, where you've got a lot of different range band covered, and he does have the ability to hit things at range that in the back that weren't expecting it. And with a ballistic skill 13, that's pretty good when he comes on. But the weird thing is, if you're going to be walking him on from the edge, having a boarding shotgun is, not necessarily great. That's not going to be good in a lot of games. Not everybody's going to be hanging around the edge of the table, and you might have to spend a few orders to get him into a position where he can use the boarding shotgun. And Panzerfaust aren't amazing offensively unless you've got an easy target, like I was saying. And the thing is, if you want to drop this guy in, he's still fairly unreliable for the drop. And 36 points, it's different with a Delta, right, where you're looking at 24 points, for a guy to drop in. Like, if you fail the drop, you're not going to be super upset, but you might be more upset if that guy happened to cost 36 points. So just keep that in mind. But he's still a great attacking piece, and if you can get the drop on people, the boarding shotgun and hitting things in the back with the Panzerfaust is really going to hurt. So you could definitely look at that as one of your only 3 drop troop options. But the other drop troop option is pretty damn amazing. So he may be fighting for a place in your army list, with the other option, which we'll talk about when we get there. Beta troopers. Now, when I said this faction could hit really, really hard, this is at least half of the reason why. This unit's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Unlinked in O-12, it's a problem. It's a big problem. But when it's linked, this unit is absolutely incredible. It is hard to say just how good this unit actually is. It's hard to get them up to a point where they're going to be linked with a bonus outside of a Harry's team, but +1 burst on this unit is good enough in most situations to deal with almost anything that you're going to have to deal with. And the reason why is because 9 times out of 10, and this is what you should be doing, is backing them up with Parvati. Parvati is effectively a Whip 18 engineer. And a Whip 18 engineer is basically an engineer that works all the time. With rerolls, it is extremely unlikely that you're going to have any of your engineer rolls fail. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you can put down sustained fire with one of these guys and pretty much chew through even some of the bigger targets that you might be coming up against. It may not work very well against the tag, speaking specifically of the Spitfire here, but against pretty much anything else, you're going to be able to put sustained fire down and pretty much chew through most things in your opponent's army if you have the orders. One of the things that I tried the other day on Tabletop Simulator was, finding a decent place for these guys to sit. on top of a building. Because they have climbing plus, they can get there quite easily. Parvati has her own movement skills as well. And moving up to the edge of a parapet of a building, prone, because these guys are moving 3 inches while prone, don't forget. It's half your first movement value. So it wasn't too hard to spend a couple of orders just getting the position and then popping one of these guys up and putting order after order after order of fire down. With the mimetism combined with the extended weight of dice, you're very unlikely to lose a firefight. And if you do lose a firefight, which I did do a couple of times, Parvati was able to just pop that guy straight back up to 2 wounds and carry on going. And if I had been unlucky and taken a couple of hits, he's unlikely to lose. See, this is the beauty of having a remote presence on a unit like this, because it means that even if you took 3 wounds from a missile launcher straight up, it means that you can still get Parvati over there, and on an 18 you can get this guy back up to working order. It just means that the Spitfire here is an insanely durable shooting piece. And then you combine the fact that you've got a dodge +3 if you get into a bad situation. Yes, it's not a full remote, so you can't buff it, but that just doesn't matter. Trust me, guys, it just doesn't matter. Because having a look at some of the stuff that you get at your disposal here, the firewall is great because it means that you can build a Harry's team around these guys, have Parvati in there, have a hacker in there, and your hacker's able to get the buffs from that firewall to really protect this guy from hacking, which is one of the only decent ways of taking him out and shutting him down. So you've got extra defense there, not to mention the fact that it has its own killer hacker profile, although I wouldn't go for that unless you're building a full core. But it's just an incredibly good unit. And it's, as I said, it's not that this faction hits specifically hard with any one gun, although Hector's plasma rifle is pretty damn amazing, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's that you can put sustained fire down with a couple of units, and this unit specifically is incredible at doing that. It's difficult to outshoot, and it's difficult to kill. I mean, I don't know what more to say. If you are running Starmada, you should definitely take one of these. It was in my opinion, a missed opportunity from Corvus Belli to include another sculpt for the Beta Trooper, probably the Spitfire. I don't know if they're going to be doing a Beta Trooper box. They probably are, considering its core and Harry's options. And actually, yeah, let's talk about those. So the core, I mean, the crazy thing is, if you're building an insane team, right, and you want to have Hector and some Beta Troopers and Parvati and everyone else in the core, you're going to be spending 200 to 250 points. It is easily going to be the biggest chunk of your army and most of your army. And you can do that, but it's a bit of a one-trick pony. And that's why I would recommend that you take one of these guys in the Harry's. I do, the big pain train would be really, really fun to run, as pain trains often are in this game. But I'm still more leaning on the side of just giving him the +1 burst and letting him have at it. He's going to win most firefights just down to that mimetism -3 going the other way. And the sheer weight of dice and the durability. So yes, absolutely amazing. Quick mentions to go to. Well, I mean, the boarding shotgun doctor is interesting, but not so much here because you have access to Parvati, who is infinitely better at those roles. And she covers your short range anyway, not to mention the fact that these guys all have nanopulsers most of the time, so your short range is pretty much covered. That's a burst 3 nanopulser, by the way, again, like the Cyclops. So yeah, at short range, these guys absolutely chew through things, so you don't have to worry too much about that. The killer hacking device, I wouldn't necessarily, have unless I was running a core, I probably wouldn't take this guy unless, but if you are running a core, it's your cheapest option, so you'll probably end up with him in there. The specialist operative, not as necessary. Again, it does have decharges, but only on a CC16. It's okay, but it's not something that it would be your go-to choice for a specialist operative, especially at 37 points. That's a lot to spend on that, in my opinion. And going, on Cyclops, they've got immunity shock as well. Obviously, Beta Troopers do because they've got 2 wounds, but having immunity shock on the Cyclops means that if you're running a Cyclops, you're spending less points for this, and he's quite, he can still take a hit, go down. Parvati can still pick him up. So you may not need to take the specialist operative version, but the Spitfires are just gross. And if you do have the extra point, take that, combo it with a hacker, and yeah, you're going to be just fine. Beta Troopers are really, really good. Bronzes. So this is an interesting profile. a couple of odd linkable options as well. So, starting with the linkable options, the bronze can be part of a fire team of Nyokas, blue coats, beta troopers. So the interesting thing is that if you do want to take a 5-man core, you're going to have to take a 5-man core starting with blue coats. Now there aren't a lot of models out for that, but I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't mind, proxying various things as different blue coats. That's fine. But my main issue here is that the blue coats themselves don't come with a lot of decent long-range gun options. Now you can take Red Fury, but obviously you're going to be taking, if you're building a core around those, then your bronze is probably going to be the one with the Red Fury, because you really should do that, in my opinion. So it kind of hamstrings that he's not available to be taken with Kappas, because I think that if you were able to take this guy with Kappas, you could do a couple of interesting things with that. Mostly he would be a really, really good sort of... Remember I said earlier they don't have a lot of really good just stand on a building and be an irritant. I'm not saying that he has the guns for that, although you could use the Acrolat Cannon, which does have an extended range, just in a pinch to be a backup ARO piece. And combined with the fact that he's got immunity total, it means that they can't just leverage a gun at him and remove him. But as I said, this faction doesn't do that very well, and this is probably your best bet for that, and it's not a very good one, so I wouldn't do that. But as a cheap core with Kappas, it would have been interesting to have him as sort of like a backup shooter, or your active turn shooter, and have one of those as an ARO piece, a throwaway ARO piece. But as it stands, you're going to have to put him with Nyokas or Beta Troopers. So you're going to be spending a lot of points of blue coats. But there is some interesting things you can do here. You can build this faction in a kind of almost Tohar-like way, where you have a core team of 3. Yes, that's totally fine. And Harry's team of 3, so you're almost like running triads. And then you can have a lot of units that have, side bots and peripherals. And you come out with quite a lot of efficiency there. And if you're doing that, it would have been nice to have Kappas, next to him. But having blue coats is fine. You can have a couple of blue coats with this guy, give him the +1 burst bonus, and use him that way as well. I don't hate this unit. I know a lot of people think he's overcosted, but don't forget he's incredibly durable, again with comboed with Parvati, who, if he goes unconscious, gets to Doctor 2 wounds as well, so he can pull him back up to full strength pretty quickly, and he's unlikely to lose 1 wound in a go because of his total immunity. So I think he's pretty damn durable, and if you're not building a list around Hector or something, this guy could be a backup durable gunfighter. At ballistic skill 13, it would have been nice to see him at 14, but that's okay. O-12 already have a lot of those, so I can see why they didn't want to throw another ballistic skill 14 heavy infantry in there. And you've got the Raptor as well, which is a side unit, and it's not linkable, but it is, it does cover that decent shooter thing well. But ballistic skill 13 is pretty damn good. With the Red Fury at +1 damage, it's a shock Spitfire. You can't go wrong. The other profiles are a little bit strange. I think with the fact that you don't really spend SWC in this faction, you probably could get away with the Red Fury more. But the other ones are where they have all the interesting equipment, and that's kind of annoying. I wouldn't take the paramedic because he's unlikely to be doing that job. So you're left with the specialist operative, and at 53 points, that's just too much, guys. I think it's too much, in my opinion, to choose this over any of the other options. The heavy shotgun is interesting. I would have liked it if it had... I mean, it's going to get +1 burst because you should link this guy. It would have been nice if it had +1 burst base, but then that would have been burst 4 heavy shotgun, so maybe not. But I don't know. I feel like I just want a bit more dice, because this guy's going to struggle to win face-to-face rolls all the time with his ballistic skill 13 on a small dice number. So I really just think the early profile you should be looking at is the Red Fury, with other units covering the other things that this guy could potentially do. Unless you, of course, were, running Kappas with other guns and stuff, and you wanted him as a sort of semi-backup ARO piece, that's fine. You can take the heavy shotgun, but I still think the Red Fury active turn shooter role that is hard to take down is where he's best positioned. And I'm going to run him a couple of times. I haven't tried him out yet. I'm thinking of of giving it a go. I have a feeling I'm going to be a little disappointed with this high points cost. You're so close to the main man in this faction, Hector, that you might want to take him instead, and find a way to fit him in. But I could see there being a few combinations, definitely with Nyokas and Beta Troopers, that you might find that you've got your Beta Trooper with a gun, you throw in the heavy shotgun, you just want to have that durable team with Parvati backing them up, and I can see that working. So yeah, I'm not gonna have a crack at these guys the way that a lot of people in the community have been. Raptor boarding squad. So in regular O-12, it's a little bit strange, and the same here, where your NCO skill doesn't necessarily matter because the guys who are giving out those extra lieutenant orders also have the Stratego skill. So they're turning their their lieutenant orders into regular orders anyway. So you're not really going to be leveraging the NCO skill. But as I mentioned earlier, if you're taking one of the blue coats as a hidden backline, guess which one's the lieutenant's from the lieutenant, then at least this guy can use the extra order. So that is something you could do if that's how you're building your list. But other than that, this is a really solid heavy infantry unit that has a decent move value at 6.2. The killer hacking device is great because it can go cyber mask, which is really awesome. Just gives you another attacking option to use against certain targets. It can be very, very good. Although I know I might be asking a bit much, but unfortunately the killer hacker doesn't also have a big gun. But that, if you're using it for that, that's fine. I can see why they didn't do that. That's you don't see that very often, and that's probably the reason. Forward Observer is just if you want a backup specialist. I think he's pretty good. Don't forget they all have the David bot, so you're not losing that functionality by picking any of these. So I think the Forward Observer profile is pretty cool as an extra specialist for an extra point over these two. I think that's not bad. The boarding shotgun at 6.2 move, that's pretty good. He is starting your deployment zone, but he can get there and shoot with a bit more efficiency. So I don't hate it. I don't hate taking the boarding shotgun. You got to remember it only takes like one order of regular movement to get near the midline, and then another order of 6.2 he could be shooting after 2 orders, so that's not too bad. +1 damage as well. It's just a little bit more lethal combined with the heavy flamer on the David bot, and also the Panzerfaust here is not to be ignored. It gives him an extra ARO option which the other profiles don't have, so that's pretty good. But if you just want the gun at ballistic skill 14, the Spitfire, fantastic. Just, that's not bad at all. 6.2 move, 43 points. I think it's pretty well priced for what it does. If you keep him near Parvati, or if she's running, you're not linking Parvati, which is still fine, and running a couple of Yud bots, which is the other way to do it, which is still totally viable, then having him, near a Yud bot support would be quite good too. But I do like this unit. I actually think it's pretty cool, and I think that if you've built out your core and your Harry's team, and you're like, yeah, I've got a few points left over, I want to try him out. I think he's a damn good gunfighter. I think he's good in regular O-12 as well, although I just feel like he gets beat out by other profiles there. But here he comes into his own a bit. So I do like this unit. It's just a shame that the NCO isn't being utilized, as much as it could be, just because of the abilities of some of these units. But yeah, they're overall pretty good. So the Epsilon. Not a lot more to say about the Epsilon here than I've said in my previous videos, only in the sense that he's not linkable. And because he's not linkable, which is a damn shame, I actually think this faction, as disgusting as these kind of units are when they're linkable, we can see it a lot in other factions and it really hurts. I think this faction could have used it. I think this faction could have used a nice linkable multi-sniper, with MSV2, because they don't have a lot of tricks, and they're going to fall victim to a lot of traditional things that people can throw at you. But having said that, taking an Epsilon unit is still a good way to go. With MSV2, you can't really go wrong. I actually like the HMG more than the multi-sniper now. I started off taking the multi-sniper because it was the model, to be honest. And, sometimes he does work, but the HMG does more work, in my opinion. I think the HMG version is really, really good. He's got a decent ballistic skill. He's putting mimetism down, and using smoke can just put your opponent at horrible -12. So, they may not be able to counter this guy. So taking the HMG is really decent. In case you guys, don't want to use the sniper model, the new Kappa HMG model isn't a decent Epsilon proxy, in my opinion. So that's something you guys think about. I wouldn't bother taking the shock marksman rifle only because I think it's a bit expensive. You could take a Psychop that has extremely similar stat line, and it's a specialist and does a bit more. No, it's not MSV2, I know, but I just think you can save a few points, no SWC on the Psychop, and still get MSV1 and a bunch of other stuff. So there you go. Santiago. So this is a really interesting inclusion in this faction, like a super interesting inclusion. I know that lore-wise, the Santiagos again are the ones that are spacefaring, so it does kind of make sense. And the fact that it's weird that it can have a duo with the bronzes. I think that might be a bit too many points to pump into one place, especially with a duo. Where it's not that duos are bad and they're great, but I think throwing two models that both want to be getting in on the action next to each other when only one of them can act at any one time, even though they both get to move up the table at the same time, you may not. I don't know. I feel like you may be. I feel like you may not be using them optimally if you put them next to each other, is what I'm saying. But overall, we know all the stat lines are great. Any Pano player will tell you that the CC on these knights is phenomenal. The ballistic skill is phenomenal. The physique is great because it's a drop troop. Don't forget, does have a drop troop variation. Where is it? Which is the insane introduction we've got here. So I've got to speak about that in a minute. But yeah, physique for 13, it's all good in close combat, that sort of thing. Martial arts level 1, which does bump up your physique, so that's really, really good. So it's going to be phys 14 most of the time. I don't know why I have to check, but I feel like I always have to check this table. I don't know why. So he's going to be getting +1 damage in close combat anyway, so that's really, really good. And CC 23 and a -3 to your opponent is fantastic. Dodge +1 inch, great. It's the old kinematica, as what you'd expect. Just makes it easier to get into close combat sometimes if you really need to do that in a pinch. A lot of the time, you're just going to shoot back. This guy's really, really good in a lot of situations. It has a lot of good guns. The stuff that you expect. Like religious troop can be a little bit annoying, but it's not by any means a reason to look down on this guy. So the first specialist operative profile, fantastic. Again, another good specialist, backup specialist in the army. 43 points. It's an interesting one though. I think I'd probably take even though it's not quite as tough. This is armor 4, whereas I'm thinking about the Raptor squad, which is armor 3. I would probably maybe be more inclined to take the Raptor squad simply because it's a little bit faster on the move, and it has the bot next to it, which adds an extra attacking option and makes things more difficult for your opponent. But the fact that it's a specialist operative is really, really cool. Although you do have that option as well in the Raptor squad, so keep that in mind. Just not on the Spitfire profile, as far as I know. I forgot to mention the killer hacking device out of the Raptor squad, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. That what you'd use that for. The other profiles, the killer hacking device here again, Whip 13. It's decent, but the drop troop one is really where you'd want to put that because it can get into the position where it can leverage that more effectively, and it's only a few more points, 6 more points. It's a lot, but it's not, it's not a deal breaker. The fact that he has a firewall is pretty cool. He can do some stuff, this profile, but I think for 39 points, there are other things in the faction that can do a similar role. Maybe being more flexible, like the beta troopers and so on and so forth. So I think those are better things. But this guy is a close combat guy. He comes with his own benefits, so I can see why you might want to take it. But really, the Spitfire is where it's at for me. The Spitfire Lieutenant is really interesting in the sense that 0 SWC. It's like they almost don't want you to spend SWC in this faction. It's like tempting you to just go, right, I've not really spent SWC, but I've still managed to get like a Spitfire and a plasma rifle and all this other stuff. Screw it, I'll just put in a missile launcher kappa and a sniper kappa and an HMG kappa, and it's almost like they want you to do that. It's kind of strange. But the fact he's 0 SWC and comes with all the other benefits is brilliant. I forgot to mention how incredible EM grenades are as well as an option. So yeah, it's really odd that this profile here with the combi rifle doesn't have the EM grenades. If it did, I would be really happy. You know, that it would be a really good mid-range fighter then, a fairly reliable one where it's doing annoying things on its way in to smack you over the head in close combat. But it doesn't. So having the EM grenades on these two profiles is really, really awesome. Combat jump. So the combat jump profile is again like a completely different unit baked into this profile. This is the best combat jump troop in this army and one of the best in the game, in my opinion. I think it's extremely durable. If you can get it into the position, it's jumping on a 13, which is actually possible to get up to a 16, of course, if you're taking the Evo bot. It's also a killer hacker. Now, the fact that it's a killer hacker can be awesome and can be terrible. It allows it to attack hackers, of course, and do things, you know, to them without actually going up and punching them in the face, which is cool. But it also makes it vulnerable to hacking in return. But of course it is anyway, so being a heavy infantry. So, you know, maybe that's not such a drawback. And at least if they try to shut you down, you are a killer hacker, which is, you know, better than not being a killer hacker when you're being hacked. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And it just gives it, you know, it's a specialist. It has a range of options. It has a range of attacking options. Obviously, the boarding shotgun is the only like real gun it's got, but that's okay because it's a drop troop, so that just gives you a template option and a decent dice option. Ballistic skill 14. If you're coming around the back of someone, catch them out of cover, you're hitting on 20s. You know, that's phenomenal. So that's really, really good. And if you get the opportunity to just walk him on and be near where you need to be, even better. The only problem is, of course, that a drop troop that's jumping in at 45 points, if you don't make the roll, you're going to be at the back of the table. And when that happens, you're going to wish you took a Spitfire. So just bear that in mind, knowing that you're taking a risk with a hell of a lot of points there. So there you go. The Zeta unit. So in the context, because we've talked about this unit before, but in the context of this faction, taking a tag, not so viable. It's very cool that you can back it up with Parvati, but if you combine this plus Parvati, the amount of points you're going to be spending, I believe that your minimum is going to be somewhere around the 120 mark, or, you know, the 116 and 17 point mark. That's a huge chunk of points to spend on two things in your army. This does have the NCO, but again, as I said, NCO isn't as useful in this faction. If you're taking one of the options, you know, while taking Hector, you can do it. You can definitely build a list, but then you're not going to be having your decent core and stuff. So I'm not sure that taking a Zeta unit in Starmarda is really the way to go, but it does all the things that a tag does, and it can be backed up by Parvati, which can make it extremely hard to put down. So it's probably worth running at least once just for the fun. But if you're doing that and Parvati's not linked, then you can do that in regular O-12 anyway. So I'm not entirely sure why you would, you know, specifically do that with Starmarda as a faction. So yes, not really seeing the benefits of taking a Zeta here. But if you do like tags, and you've got a game plan there where you've got, you know, a Harry's, a core, and a Zeta, it is possible to build that list, and it can work. And, you know, one of your, and maybe even have Parvati running around with a couple of bots to support multiple targets. Then you could run a Zeta and maybe still leverage the cool thing about playing a sectorial, which is fire teams. But there you go. That's the Zeta unit. Okay, Cyber Ghosts. So we talked a lot about this unit when we talked about Vanilla O-12 and the things that it adds to the faction, which are really cool. But they are a little bit hamstrung in Starmada, simply because A, they're not linkable, so you can't add that ballistic skill bonus to the picture, which is annoying. You also can't do multiple pictures, which makes them more reliable with the +1 burst. So as it stands on its own as an individual hacker, yes, it's a good one, and you still have access to white noise and so on, but you're not going to be able to use them as effectively without some of the tools that Vanilla O-12 have. So with that in mind, you may end up shying away from taking one of these when you have other options that, and filling a spot in a link, but also being a killer hacker or also being a regular hacker. Yes, they're not a hacking device plus, but with this, you know, with the unreliability of the pictures that are going to come out here, you're not going to be able to use white noise that effectively. So you're going to struggle, and you're not really going to be using cyber mask on this guy. And it's not that it's expensive, it's quite cheap. And if you do like having the ability to throw white noise down, which can be really handy when dealing with enemy MSV troops, of course, then this is definitely your way to do that. And if you position that near your, one of your main shooting units that's in a link team, as long as it hasn't got MSV and isn't a Psychop, for example, like throwing white noise in front of a beta troop and then shooting through it is a really decent way to deal with enemy MSV troops. So that is your option for doing that. I can see why you may not end up taking a Cyber Ghost, but at least the option is there, and it is pretty damn decent, as I mentioned in the previous videos. Lambda, again, similar thing. You don't have access to the Monstrucker, so you haven't got the super cheap engineer, but it's okay because you have probably the best engineer in the game in Parvati. In this faction, she is also one of the best doctors in the game, so it kind of makes these two a little bit redundant. But if you do have, because they're cheap enough, right, to throw in as almost like as a cheerleader. So if you do have Parvati linked, it means that she can't have a Yudbot. So if you do want that extra coverage for your doctor or engineer, you could take one of these guys and a Yudbot, and you'd have a lot more healing, recoverable coverage across the battlefield. So I can see why you might take one of these in a pinch if that's what you're going for. But that's pretty much all I can really say about these guys in Starmarda in that context, at least. Going on really quickly through these before we get to the really juicy stuff. Going through all the support remotes. Obviously, your OCO is your only source of a sensor. There may be another one coming up that I've completely forgotten about, but as far as I remember, the OCO is your only source for a sensor, and at 16 points, you should probably take one. O-12, do have to deal with enemy infiltrators, enemy hidden deployment and camo and stuff, and this is your way to get around that. It's an easily killable one, but it is your way of doing that. Same with the Peeler. Obviously, total reaction robots are fantastic, and if you're running one of the drop troops, you might have taken an Evo. In that case, you can combo with some of these bots, which is definitely useful. This faction is going to struggle a little bit to put out strong, durable ARO pieces. So why not put one out that has weight of dice on its side, So peelers are always good. And they have Climbing Plus, which does combo with a couple of things, as I mentioned in the previous videos, and it's pretty good. Parvati can easily heal it if you're running that, because she's got super jump, providing you don't get yourself shot on the way up. You can get to wherever it is, so that's pretty cool. Millicent, again, with the missile launcher. There are ways to combo with the missile launcher. It can be really, really good, but it has its own drawbacks, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this kind of unit. And if you're willing to spend the orders and the points on setting up combos with this unit, then fair enough. But other than that, it does what it does, and it's cheap and cheerful, and at least you're spending SWC. Yudbot's really good. You're going to need those, and sometimes you want to run Parvati on her own, although, as I said, sometimes she's really cool linked. So that's up to you. Keeters, the Flash Pulse bots, you only get one AVA on this, and this is when you know that Corvus Belli want you to run this faction more of a limited insertion capacity, because when they don't give you access to bots like this, cheap bots to get cheap orders, you know that they want you to stay within those 10, pretty much within those 10 or close to those 10. So you do have one here, and it is one of the few repeaters in the faction, like all of these robots, some of them are. You get access to another repeater, but it does start in your deployment zone, so keep that in mind. You could run one of these out with a Cyber Ghost, though, to set up a different range for your white noise, so keep that in mind too. That's pretty good. The Fuzzbots, you're pretty much just going to use this to buff the other bots, as you can imagine, but you're also going to be using it to buff some of your drop troops, to them specifically the Crusher and the Santiago Knight. And if you're doing that, 15 points, fair enough. And your SWC, you're not really that starved. You can be in this faction if you want to take some of the other guns, but we've talked about that. It is not always that simple, and you probably will have a bit of SWC left over to spend on one of these, so that's cool. Andromeda. So now we start getting into the characters, which are the real juice of the faction. So let's really start thinking about these. So your only infiltration option in the faction is Andromeda. In terms of points, she sort of sits in Crusher territory, which is actually pretty good because it gives you, something that you can not be too scared about. She's got the same forward deployment as a Crusher, so you could combo them quite nicely together and help them support each other in the midfield, which is really good. If you're playing a button push heavy mission, I think you should probably start your list by putting her in, putting a couple of crushers in, or just one crusher, or whatever you want to do there, depending on what you want to spend your points on later. But she really is one of your only go-to options for doing those button pushing missions and controlling the midfield, so you should definitely be using her for that. In terms of the infiltration stuff, that's completely up to you as to whether you want to risk the rolls on those and whether you want to spend a couple of extra points. It's not too many extra points for you not to try it. And if you do successfully get Andromeda where she needs to go, she will do a lot of damage. She's a really, really good unit overall, as we've spoken about earlier. She has a lot of good options. I spoke about the decharges, everything. This stuff is hilarious when you actually get it into play. So I can see why you would want to make a roll, but I'd really like her to support one of the crushers. And if you give the crusher like the light rocket launcher, then you can probably safely take the submachine gun and save some points just because he's covering other range bands. But if you do want the extra, punch and templates of a boarding shotgun, you can do that as well, and that's absolutely fine. Because this faction is kind of starved for specialists, I think you really should take her, and it's a cool excuse to use a great model. As I said in the other video, she does come with her own bag of problems, which is mostly the size, and she can struggle to get up buildings and to higher elevations to attack her targets. So bear that in mind. And as I said about the bike is different simply because he can get off the bike, change his silhouette value, and get up to places that she might not be able to get to. So sometimes you might be thinking of taking the bike if you want to do that, but she's more durable and she does other stuff. So yeah, she's very good. Casanova, again, this is another one where you could do very similar things to be said about him over Andromeda. He does a very, very similar job, exact same for deployment value. He doesn't necessarily have, he doesn't have guard and things like that to keep him alive, but he does have mimetism -6, so he is a little bit harder to deal with. I don't think he has, he does have shock immunity, thank God. I actually used him the other day, so I should remember. So yes, this is effectively a 2-win model, just like the crushers. And if you want to swap, like you're thinking, well, I don't just want to run crushers for my midfield presence or to do some button pushing. I want to take something a little different, and this guy definitely does that. And he's a beast, obviously, in suppressive fire with a mimetism -6, so he can really lock down an area of the table a little bit more effectively than Andromeda and Crusher can. And he's going to be harder to outmaneuver than Andromeda as well. So I wouldn't think badly of you if you took this guy and maybe a Crusher and or Andromeda as well if you want to do that. The only problem is if you take all 3 of those, you're going to be running about 100 points. You're going to have the steel phalanx problem. So if you want a good midfield presence, you really do have to spend the points on it. But yeah, that's Casanova. He's pretty good at doing what he does. Shona Carano. So Shona Carano is very different in this sectorial, as what I said, compared to what I'd said about her in regular O-12. In O-12, she was competing with a lot of different profiles that had a lot of different skills. But in this faction, she's linkable. And not only that, she's a wild card. So the fact that she's okay points-wise, and the fact that you can plug her into any of your link teams to give them some explosive close combat ability, literally explosive close combat ability, very good, reliable close combat ability, can fill a hole in your link team. She can also pair up really nicely with Hector to make sure that you're getting extra dice and things on either one, and then you're choosing the right weapon or whatever you want to do for the situation. You can also help Parvati out. One of the things that's one of Parvati's main drawbacks is that she's not very good in close combat, and it's an easy way to take her out. So if she has a Shona bodyguard, that's not, that's going to be a tricky proposition for your opponent if they want to try and approach them as a group. She's really good to throw in if you're running the full pain train, of course. Just take a couple of other units, and then you can run Parvati, Hector, and Shona. That's pretty damn cool. And the fact that Parvati's there means that none of these are going down. But more importantly, you can actually run her with Varangian Guard. Now, I would have wanted to talk about these guys earlier if they were counted as light infantry. They would have popped up. But they do have a couple of options here that the other wildcards can drop into. So they do have a duo and a Harry's. It is very possible that the one thing that Shona doesn't have is smoke, and you can definitely run one of these with Shona to effectively create a model that's around the 39 points to 40 points mark. Two models there, one of them has the smoke to support the other. It kind of works a bit like Jinquo in White Banner. I want to say White Banner. Yes, White Banner. See, because we've got White Company now, it's confusing. In White Banner, where they're supporting each other. One is doing the close combat, craziness, and the other one is throwing the smoke and then giving them the extra dice. So I wouldn't mind running her with a Varangian as a side attacking piece that can get to where it needs to because of the smoke. That's pretty cool as well. You can also run them as a Harry's, but I don't think any of those three models would be benefiting from the +1 burst. But it is cool if you were to run a Varangian, a Shona, and then something else like a Psychop. They could definitely use the +1 burst. So you'd have a really, really good and relatively cheap Harry's there. If you've run like a Pain Train core, it wouldn't be a bad backup Harry's for around the 60 to 70 point mark. So that's definitely something to think about too. So Shona Karana, much more usable in this faction and a lot more fun. And I think you should definitely try her out if you're playing this faction, because I just think she's a lot of fun. Awesome in Aristea as well. Catherine Cho. So this is a fantastic lieutenant option and chain of command option. I think the chain of command is very sexy in this faction, simply because if you're running a really obvious lieutenant like Hector, which you probably would want to do, or you're running Saladin, having a chain of command there is really good. And the fact that she's Holomaster means that she's not going to be easy to spot or weed out as long as you're clever with what you mask her as. But overall, she's just a really, really good option if you want to run her and you're planning on running the what's wrong with me? The Raptor boarding squad. If you're running the Raptor boarding squad with her, then the Raptor can use her NCO and actually get some, unique benefits out of that. I wouldn't suggest building a list just to do that, because, obviously running Hector with his 2 lieutenant orders that can be used by anyone is more efficient. But if you're not running Hector, that combination does work as well. But it's hard to see why you wouldn't, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. But yes, she's very, very good. She's a cool option. It's really nice that she's been included here, because otherwise I think you would be kind of stuck with taking Hector if she wasn't here. So I think it's really good that she is. So yes, Parvati. So I've mentioned a lot so far. I've talked about her linkable options. She's brilliant anywhere you put her. She's a wild card, so she can go in any team. So do be creative with that. She is, one of the best engineers, if not the best engineer in the game. She is one of the best doctors in the game. She's great with a couple of Yud bots. If you're running two teams that you want to support, you've got a couple of Yud bots across the field just supporting those two. That allows her to move around as well. She's not a terrible attacking piece, She's got a submachine gun at +1 burst. Might be ballistic skill 12, but that's okay. 4 dice is pretty damn cool. She has the super jump, so she could be good for picking off lighter targets or things that weren't expecting to be attacked from that angle. Obviously, the dodge +3 is just to make sure that her physique 10 doesn't get her killed. She does have a flash pulse at whip 15, which is fantastic. Yes, she's just got it all, and she's one of the reasons to play this faction, if I'm being honest, because she's not linkable anywhere else, and when she is linkable, she's just so efficient picking up whoever she's standing next to. Really, really like this model, and one of the mainstays of this faction for sure, and one of the reasons that keeps me excited about writing lists for this faction. It's just hard to balance. It's just hard to balance some of the expensive units and still be able to include her. But I think you definitely should. I've said a lot about her already, and I can probably say more. But she's very, very good. And if you guys want to elaborate more on some of the crazy things you've come up with Parvati in the comments, that would be amazing. Saladin, spoke about him in regular O-12. He's still a little bit on the strange side. He's a little bit expensive. He's one of those things that's like, if Hector didn't exist, I'd really like to take Saladin in this faction, or if Hector didn't have his lieutenant abilities, which I think he probably doesn't need to be as good as he is as a lieutenant, then Saladin would just be absolutely amazing, and you'd see him a little bit more because, you know, it's a really high willpower value. But as it stands, that's what he's got going for him, is that high willpower value, and possibly, you know, the fact that he's got a repeater to defend himself with all the hacking options you have available. +1 command token is fantastic, of course. It's always really good, but it's more useful in a vanilla faction, in the sense you're probably going to be using more coordinated orders in that setting than you would be here. But because he's a unit that's going to be operating entirely on his own, and he's going to need to be defended, you're going to need to divert resources and set up to keeping this guy alive, or you're going to be having to take Catherine Cho for the chain of command backup as well. And I just feel like all of that might just be a little bit more work than is necessary because you took this unit. I mean, he's got some stuff here that is useful, but not useful on this unit. Like ballistic skill 13 on this unit is cool, but you're just not going to be wanting to take those fights with him and doing a lot of shooting with him, especially since he's only got a combi rifle. You know, he's got a shock CCW, which is, you know, fine. With CC19, you know, he's passable at it. You know, he's basically only there for his whip 16 and his lieutenant abilities. If he was linkable, I would be much more inclined to take this unit, because he's basically a 2-in guy. Yes, it would only be with a combi rifle, but, you know, he might get benefits from those link team buffs and might have a little bit more utility and make him a little less likely to die if he absolutely has to shoot something. But as it stands, him being on his own, he may be a bit of a liability for you. So let's talk about the big man. The big man Hector. So this unit's a little bit too good, I have to say. You know, compared to his previous version, it was nice that he got a bit of a buff. I know a lot of Steel Phalanx players still took him because, you know, you can build different combinations with Steel Phalanx, and that, you know, you couldn't get, there were certain combinations you couldn't get unless you took Hector. I don't want to go into the way that used to work in N3, but you know, different lists of builds required Hector. But now that he's been placed into other armies and other factions, especially this one, he's a little bit good. And it really just comes down to the fact that this Lieutenant +1 order and the Strategos level 1, it's a bit much, right? In Starmarda, I think he's fine. I think the fact that this set of abilities is included in regular O-12 is a little bit nuts. And if it wasn't, I actually think that Starmarda would be more of the way to go to get these unique lieutenant abilities off of Hector. But because he exists in regular O-12, it's a bit of a strange one. You know, it makes you feel like if you want to run Hector, he's not terrible on his own, and you could just run him in regular O-12 and then get access to all that stuff, you know? So what I think they should have done is just keep these lieutenant abilities available only to Starmarda, and I feel like they should do that in the future. Because then he'd still be a great addition to O-12 just with his general abilities, but he wouldn't be this sort of vying for the top spot for lieutenant with their existing great lieutenants. And here he's almost an essential part of this army, because this army wants you, with its points costs and its structure of units and what they've given you, to play a 10 order list. That's what it's trying to get you to do, to play a low model count. And if you're playing a low model count, the only way you're going to get those extra orders that you might need is to take Hector. You know, you're going to have to take this Lieutenant +1 order here. It's 2 extra orders. It gives you a 10 order list, 12 orders, you know, and it makes you want to build the list around him, and makes him almost ubiquitous. And I don't necessarily like a unit being almost ubiquitous in an army. I understand why you know, some armies, right, you want to do this army to play a certain thing, to play a certain tactic. Fine, but a certain model, a certain character, maybe not. Because, you know, we've talked about his stats and his abilities in the other videos, and how incredibly good he is at absolutely everything. And how, you know, now in this faction, he could be standing next to a beta trooper who's doing the Spitfire duties with his mimetism, taking those face-to-face rolls, and then when you need a bit more oomph, you could pump him out with a +1 burst on his plasma rifle. If you're doing the pain train, it's a ballistic skill 16 burst 4 plasma rifle. Those templates going down, especially with this X visor here, that means that a ballistic skill 16, he's probably not hitting on anything less than a 13, even at long ranges. And that's disgusting. Plasma templates going down on a 13, multiple plasma templates potentially going down on a 13 at, silly ranges most of the board is pretty damn good. And it's one of the reasons why this faction can hit incredibly hard when it wants to. If you can keep him alive, and which you can because of Parvati and that +2 wounds as well, you can if you can keep him alive, he will just mow down things. And Plasma's good against basically everything, taking multiple saves. If you can score multiple hits with Hector, even a tag, because it's a template weapon, their armor value is going to be their base armor value, and their BTS as well, unless it's, something like a salamander or something, is still going to be only as good as their armor value. And just making them make multiple saves over and over again is going to chew through them. It's going to kill them, So even the toughest targets in the game can fall victim to this plasma rifle, given enough orders in a good position. So Hector's just gross. He's absolutely gross, and he's absolutely fantastic, and he's a fantastic model. I just don't think that the full Hector version should be available to regular O-12. But right here, it makes a lot of sense. I just wish that this faction had a couple more things in it that could get you extra orders, and that would stop Hector being almost an auto-include, dare I say it, because it's a hard thing to say in Infinity, but he almost is an auto-include. He's very dangerously near that in this faction right now. So the only two profiles we've got left to cover are Warcores and Varangian Guard. Before I talk about Varangian Guard, I think that I need to do a list building video for this faction. So the next video to come up will be a list building video for Starmarda, and then we'll probably go back to regular O-12, just because I don't think a lot of the things that I've talked about here, you need to be talking about them in context and in and on the table, or how a list for different missions would look. So we'll talk about that in a future video. So the last thing we need to talk about is Varangians. I mentioned that they've got their own links, and that you can do little things with them, with the other wildcard troopers you've got in this faction, which is definitely really, really cool. Comboing them with the Cyclops is just excellent. They are only AVA 2, which is the only thing that, if you're putting one with some Varangians, then you may not have all the Cyclops that you'd want to take, but still, that's they're really, really good, and I almost want to max AVA them most of the time anyway. But yes, these are good. If you want a cheap little Harrys to run up the table and just be annoying because you've done the pain train, that's cool. As I said, you can combo them other units, get a specialist in there, get anything in there you need. It's really good. And the fact they're available is great because you've got smoke. And smoke is fantastic. You may even just want to run one or two of these guys on their own. You only got AVA 2, so if you're not linking them, you could just run one. Combo it with your Epsilon. You can still do that combo. It works just as well here. You can also combo them with other stuff that has MSV. Nothing else has MSV 2, but that's okay. You could be using weight of dice and applying negative mods with that smoke to your opponent. A Cyclops shooting through with a multi-marksman rifle of 4 dice. You may be hitting on 7s, but they may not be able to hit back at all, so they might be forced to dodge. So that's still a combo that's worth doing. And the Varangians being in here is almost like a saving grace for this faction, because they did need some extra tools, and at least they have smoke. So that's really, really good. That stops them from being in the position that Foreign Company were in when they first released, where they had all the characters and some good guns, but no way to deal with some of the nastier tricks in the game, or to do some tricky things themselves. So yeah, Varangian's very, very good, and obviously Warcores are Warcores, and they do the things that Warcores do. So guys, thank you so much for sitting through another lengthy unit breakdown from this channel. I hope you guys enjoyed it. There's so much more to talk about that I probably didn't mention. It's been a tough one to write down notes for this faction. And there's probably loads more. I'm still trying to figure them out myself, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are figuring out what the juice is. And it's difficult for us to try these things out right now, especially in the UK, because we can't play games, and I get a few number of games on Tabletop Simulator at the moment, so it is tricky. But we're going to be doing on Wednesday, when I do my next stream, we're going to be the rest of my bronze, so you guys can see how I do like non-metallic metal and stuff like that, and just shading and all those different techniques for painting. But also we're going to be talking a lot. I'm going to try and get as many Infinity guys into the chat as is humanly possible, and I'd love to talk about O-12. I'm going to be PMing people. I'm just going to be trying to get as many people into that chat. So if you guys are listening to this video and you want to join me, it's going to be at 9:30 GMT on Wednesday. On Twitch, it's Seb_K_minis on twitch.tv, and hopefully I'll see you guys there. Obviously, it's Tabletop Republic's YouTube channel, and if you want to check out the online store, I'm going to be putting the latest Infinity releases up there today. So they're going to be available if you're in the UK. We can ship to you, no problems. Please check out our other videos as well. There's going to be loads more coming up. I'm doing a Battletech video soon, so that's going to be pretty cool. But until the next video, guys, I will see you. Have a good one. Stay safe.